All right, welcome everyone to the XojoTalk podcast. I'm Paul Levine, the Xojo developer evangelist. This time I have with me Paul Levine, the maker of the EverWeb software, and he's going to talk to us about all kinds of fun stuff. And in particular, Paul, why don't you start off, welcome, by giving us a little bit of an overview about how you came to use Xojo, what you use it for.
Well, that would go back about 15 years. I think I was about 14 years old. I had just gotten my first PowerBook at the time. And my brother and my father, who were really big into computers, they were doing software reviews. So they had a Xojo disk. Well, I guess back then, real basic disk. And my brother said, learn this. Learn how to make software. It'll be good. So I started fiddling around with it, and I didn't really get anywhere. And then I kind of put it away for a couple weeks or a couple months. And then one day I remember just walking home from school thinking, it'd be really cool if I could build a software program. So I just started playing with it more, and I built this really stupid game, I remember. And I thought it was so cool. It was just so cool that I created something. And then I remember back then, this goes way back to when they had that hotline server up. So I went there and I downloaded all these example programs, and I started creating a file browser called Macintosh Explorer, like Windows Explorer, but for the Mac.
Okay.
And I released that on Version Tracker, which was around back then.
Oh, I remember Version Tracker. That was big back in the OS 10 days when OS 10 started out. I remember that.
Yeah, even before that in OS 9, and then they got bought out by download.com and kind of died, I guess. But I released it there, and it, over the weekend, got a couple thousand downloads, and that was really cool. And then people started buying it, and I thought, that's really, really amazing. A couple months ago, I had no idea how to do any of this, and now I wrote this program that people are buying. And when I think back to it, I'm surprised it even ran, because I was doing things like using the absolute path of the folder items instead of saving the file names or alias data or whatever. So right. I'm surprised it ran for most of the time, but that's kind of the story. And then I had actually coincidentally met somebody in my high school who was doing real basic development too, and he was making an HTML editor. So we teamed up and we released Web Design, which was an HTML editor back in the day, which I discontinued a couple of years ago. And that led to search engine optimization software, because that's what customers wanted after they were building their websites, which led to a lot of iWeb users using our SEO software. And then when Apple discontinued iWeb, I figured we should make a replacement. And that's pretty much the story of EverWeb.
So that's how EverWeb came to be. So you primarily have been using Xojo to make apps that you've been selling all these years. Yeah,
pretty much for desktop software, exclusively Xojo. Pretty much.
Wow, so that's a bit unusual and more unique. A lot of people use it for internal type things and consulting type work. So that's interesting.
Well, that's funny, because that's what I've heard, and I think it's kind of crazy not to use it, especially nowadays when everybody wants Mac Windows native software. I know a lot of companies who are just using .NET or Visual Basic or whatever, and they couldn't support Mac users. So when the Mac started getting huge, 5 to 10 years ago, they had to rewrite all their code. Whereas for me, I was able to release Windows software in pretty much a week of work and testing. And then I was able to, change the interface around a bit so that everything worked properly on Windows.
So you generally have all your apps running on Mac and Windows?
So about 3 or 4 years ago, I started porting the Mac software to Windows. Right now, EverWeb is about 90% complete on Windows. There was a really big flickering issue, which at XDC, William pointed out that it was my bad code in there that was causing it. And once I kind of took away an invalidate command that was sitting in there, it was working much, much better. And
so you were just doing like a refresh and having it erase the background and stuff like that?
Yeah, I had an invalidate in there at a point that I shouldn't have.
Okay.
I just wasn't checking. And on the Mac, obviously, it was fine because of the double buffering. On Windows, it was just crazy flickering when you move the mouse over. So I thought that I wasn't going to be able to build a Windows version, but with William's help, kind of just pointing out my mistakes, we now have something that's pretty close to being released.
Nice. So have you done most of the coding work for your apps at this point, would you say?
Most of them. Sometimes we contract stuff out. The core of EverWeb was contracted out, and then parts of it are contracted out, and now it's mostly me putting it all together.
That's impressive. So coming from no programming background whatsoever as a teenager to whipping up your own software and selling it, that's pretty neat little story there.
Yeah, let me pretend I'm a professional programmer. The final product looks good. It's the internals that I'm a little worried about.
Nobody look inside and see what I've created, see the Frankenstein monster I've created. But
yeah, it scares me sometimes going back to code 6 months later and thinking, what was I thinking at the time? It's...
Well, even professional programmers do that, I can tell you. I consider myself a professional programmer. I've been doing it for 20-something years now, and there's never been a program that I haven't written and looked at 6 months later and said, "Oh my God, what was I thinking? This is horrible." And
yeah, that's the interesting thing, and it's everybody, all the programmers kind of have all the same hurdles and the same problems and the same issues and worries about their own code, and I think it's kind of cool that way because everyone can kind of look at a problem and they'll have a different way to solve it. And that's the really interesting thing about programming, and that's what keeps me interested in it. It's the problem solving, finding ways to approach the problems, and looking at other people's code is always a learning experience.
Yeah, definitely. That's how I first learned to program, was just by reading at the time, printouts of games and stuff that were in magazines and typing them in and changing things to see what made them tick, essentially.
Well, I guess if I was starting now, I'd be learning programming from you because you're doing all the example projects. That's what I used back then. And starting now, I'd probably just be going through all the example projects that you've been working on. So me and you would probably have the exact same style had I started recently.
Well, then you'd have, as I like to say, you'd be using the correct style because
I'd be perfect. It'd be...
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I was going to bring up a point now and I completely forgot it. That's what happens on these podcasts. You start talking and like in a real conversation, you're like, oh, I wanted to say something. Oh, I didn't write it down. It's lost. It'll pop up later. But yeah, every programmer, no matter how long they've been programming, is going to look at code they've written and say, this is the worst code I've ever written if it was, 6 months old. And
yeah.
I mean, that's a good thing because, everyone else can look at other people's code and, they can think that, but you think that too. And it is neat that this is what the point I wanted to bring up was you mentioned the different ways to solve a problem. And that is one of the big things I try to stress to people is there's not one way to do something. So you'll often see, people post in the forums, they run into a wall or a question or something, and they feel they're completely stuck. But in the case of creating software, you can just back right up and think about it and maybe go down a completely different path and solve your problem and not hit whatever wall you thought you were stuck at.
Yeah, I could always. There's times when I would just wake up in the middle of the night and think, "Wow, that's how I should do it." Something that I've been agonizing for weeks or months over. How do I accomplish this? What should I do? And then one day, middle of the night, usually in the shower. Actually, a lot of thinking goes on in the shower.
You should have whiteboards in there. Shower whiteboards to write notes.
I think that's a good idea. And you just have this epiphany once in a while, and you're just like, wow, that's how I should do it. And it's easy.
Yeah, and I was talking with a friend about this just the other day, that sometimes too, you just got to shove something aside and, stop thinking about it for a while because you've exhausted all possibilities that you can think of at the moment. You're kind of stuck down a certain path, so it's limiting your creativeness. And you set it aside, go do something else completely different. And then when you come back to it, you might say, oh, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
And you try this one little thing, and all of a sudden your completely insurmountable problem is trivial, and you just can't believe it. So that has happened to me many times as well.
Yeah, you feel smart, you feel great
until the next thing comes up.
Yeah. And then it's stress all over. You sleep over it.
Yeah. Nobody wants that. So. Tell us a little bit about this EverWeb project that is currently consuming a lot of your time.
So it's my baby. It's pretty much a what you see is what you get website builder. The goal is just to pretty much take away the technical hurdles of building a website, take away all the limitations of building a website. I want people who have no idea about HTML or CSS or JavaScript or anything to be able to get a website online. I think that that's what software, that's what computers, that's what technology should do. It should take away all the hurdles and all the inner workings. You shouldn't have to think about that. So EverWeb is basically for the person who is a small business owner or an accountant or running an organization or something, and they need to get their website up, but they don't have those technical skills. They don't want to call somebody to do it who they might not be able to hear from or have to wait for them to do all the updates. They can do everything they can. And I think right now it is the only native downloadable website builder that also integrates with a hosting platform. So you don't even need to worry about FTP details or anything like that. We've built this whole system so you just enter your email and password that you signed up with. It gets all the information from our servers, puts it all online. You can create your email accounts. You can create add-on domains to have more websites. The whole point is just take away all the hurdles and give something easy to non-techies.
Well, that's pretty slick. Yeah, I was just going to ask you that. How are people, hosting this stuff? Because that's a common source of difficulty. Is you go through all the trouble to design a great website, but then you still have to try to understand. Well, how do I put it somewhere so people can see it?
Yeah, you got to find somewhere to put it, and then there's so many options. If you go to some of the big hosting companies, they try to upsell you on this or whatever, and people always have these questions. How do I get it online? And we just want to make it really, really simple. And I can remember building websites 15 years ago. You needed to know HTML. Now you need to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery framework, everything. And it's hard. And computers shouldn't be making things hard. They should be making things easy, like Xojo.
Yeah, exactly. That's one thing. They add more and more technology so you can do more and more cool things with computers, but then it makes the act of making those cool things become much more difficult
and overwhelming. You don't want to think, oh, I gotta do this, and then think about how many steps and how hard it is. You want to use technology to help you make things faster and more efficiently.
Right. Well, that sounds pretty neat. We'll get links up to that in the show notes, which you can view on the Xojo blog, and also probably in your podcast tool that you use to listen to these things. Usually there's somewhere in there it shows you show notes. You can just tap on things and read while you're listening to us chat merrily along. Presuming I, put all of them in, but I usually get pretty good about that. All right. So EverWeb, how long would you say you've been working on that particular project?
Wow, a long time. Yeah. We started doing it when Apple didn't release an iWeb update in iLife 11. I kind of had the assumption that it was being discontinued. I kind of started thinking about that, and even if it wasn't being discontinued, it was originally just for sharing your blog posts and your pictures. It was never made for building a business website. So we decided to start building EverWeb. And back at the time, I thought it'd be difficult, but not so difficult. But it took about almost 2 years to get from the concept to a release. So it took a really long time. And some of the features that started to get introduced in Xojo came out just in time in order to create EverWeb. So the transparency with images and colors was essential to making EverWeb work the way that it works. So that feature pretty much, if you can think about when that feature came out, that I believe is right around we started working on EverWeb. And so there's small features, everything kind of came together. It was as if we were meant to make EverWeb. Everything kind of just came together exactly as we needed it, all the features we needed, and we were able to create it. And it's very difficult taking, kind of abstracting the user from all the hurdles of building a website. We have things like automatic frames around your pictures, just for like a nice design, or gradients, and doing that and exporting it to HTML in a way that is consistent with what the user sees and making sure it works on all browsers, on all devices. It's really, really difficult. And luckily we spent a lot of time, but it's so far so good.
Yeah, that's the thing with most large scale software projects is they can have that initial startup time that is longer than a lot of people probably suspect, and particularly for big desktop type apps. I mean, those things can get pretty powerful and have a lot of features, and it's not necessarily like the mobile type apps that usually are much smaller and focused, so they don't have quite as long a development period.
Yeah, and the other thing too is you start to think about something, and we're kind of lucky because we're modeling it after something that's already been released, but there's a lot of features that weren't already in iWeb that we had to think about. And you have them in your head and you think that they'll work out a certain way, and then you spend all this time implementing it and you think, that's not going to work. That's not right. That's not user-friendly. That's not going to let me add new features to it in the future. So you really have to build something so you can actually see it before you know if something's going to work. And then you can start to see all the improvements you need to put in. And sometimes you need to rewrite everything. So we were about to release version 1.8, and there was a big problem with how I did fixed position text and shapes in EverWeb. So I spent the last couple days rewriting the entire thing, which is good in one way because it lets you clean up your code. But in another way, you just kind of want to get this thing released already. So it's frustrating, but it's also beneficial. So yeah, there's a lot of hurdles taking on any type of software project, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. And that brings up the point of actually just getting to the point where you ship the darn thing, because a lot of people can easily get tricked into just spending time refining and adding one more thing, and they never actually ship anything. And then, their software never gains any traction, and then, it kind of dies on the vine. And that's just the worst. So it takes some serious amount of commitment to be able to just say, all right, time to ship. And it sounds like you've, done that throughout your career of, making these type of apps, because you've been able to ship a lot of apps.
Well, I think you just close your eyes and ship. You close your eyes, you build, and then you leave. You walk outside and you hope it works out. And there's always going to be problems. There's two probably kind of famous quotes, and it's you got to be embarrassed with what you ship, or you waited too long. And shipping is a feature. And I think
shipping is definitely a feature. Yeah.
Are true. You got to ship. People are going to hate it. People are going to anything you put out there, you'll get criticism for. You got to do it. You got to, and it's always a hard thing to do.
Yeah, you absolutely got to ship, and that's probably a big thing. Is you often see, when you read tech blogs and stuff about people always saying, some next big thing that Microsoft or Google's working on is way better than, the current model of phone or something else that's shipping. And it's like, if it's not shipping, it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter. And so, talk about what's shipping, use what's shipping, and refine what's shipping. And that does make it a lot easier, I think, for people these days. I mean, when I started out, the internet was in its infancy, and so distribution of software was still, a lot of hard, CDs and mailing stuff out. So if you shipped something and it really didn't work right, you didn't have a great way to repair it quickly.
Yeah. And you know what? That scared me a lot because back, 10 years ago, and especially when I first started, all the payment processors like Accelerate, they wanted you, or Kagi, they wanted you to ship on a CD, and I was always so afraid of doing that because I knew that there would be bugs in there that when it's online, I can just upload a new version and tell people to re-download. When it's on a CD, it's out there forever. And it's kind of with the App Store too, same type of thing, because when you put it on the App Store, you can't just instantly fix something. It still needs to go through an approval process, which can be shorter, but you still have so you got to make sure your products really, really work before committing to a CD or the App Store in some cases.
Yeah, definitely. The Apple's App Store's got 7 to 10 day wait after you hit the button. You hit your first button that says, all right, I've sent it off to Apple. And then you get the waiting period. And then if something is found to be a problem, you generally still have to deal with the same waiting period. They do, from what I understand, I haven't had to use this, have an expedited, quote, review that might turn it around more quickly, but they don't encourage that sort of thing. So it's not like, you can use that often.
Yeah, I haven't used it often, but I think if you were kind of using it, a couple times because you identified major issues, they're probably going to think that you have bad stuff, which you probably might, you probably should be doing your testing properly. But yeah, when you're not in control of it, it gets it gets hard to just put something out there.
So do you take advantage of any of the app stores, or do you kind of shy away from them?
So we do have all of our older products in the Mac App Store. EverWeb is not yet in there. There's some problems that we need to overcome. I mean, we can't afford to give Apple 30% of the subscription revenue because we do the hosting part.
Right.
We could get something in there, and we're working towards it. And we've been in touch with Apple about getting it in there, and hopefully soon. But I also think that having full control over the distribution and not giving away the 30%, I think that there's a lot of value in that. There's value in knowing who your customer is. There's, so you can upsell them or sell them different things or just communicate with them. So you got to weigh the pros and the cons. The App Store is very crowded right now. If you get featured by Apple, that's great. That can provide a lot of press, but you got to weigh the pros and the cons there.
Yeah, well, especially in the case of the Mac App Store, it's because there aren't as many Macs obviously that are in use as there are the iOS devices. That so you don't just get that quantity number. But I think I just saw an article recently that someone had an app that ended up being, I think, number one in some particular category. The category escapes me. And, people were all excited, and they started asking people, well, how much do you think we made on the day that we were number one? And people were giving all kinds of estimates. And, it was, they were saying, oh, you made, thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. And the end result, the developer came back and said, no, we made like $400 and something dollars or something like that. And it was like, really? So something that sold $400 ended up being a top paid app for a couple days anyway. So it makes you wonder how Apple tracks these sort of things, and also how powerful the Mac App Store side is anyway.
Yeah. The Mac App Store, I guess, is what I was referring to back then, because I haven't had experience with the iOS. Obviously the iOS App Store is the only way that you could sell the products.
Right, yeah, on the iOS side, yeah. Otherwise, you got to, jailbreak is not really a marketing strategy.
Well, the thing is, at this point, I don't think the Mac App Store is a marketing strategy right now. I think that it's just distribution at this point. And in most cases, for most people, you need to do your own marketing. So, if you're spending all this money doing marketing, you want to be able to control your distribution. But, for everyone, it's different. And for us, we're still kind of looking into getting into the Mac App Store.
Yeah, it seems like most people tend to try and do it both ways. I've certainly seen a lot of companies that start off in the Mac App Store and then get fed up with, all the stuff we've kind of mentioned, and then just pull out and then say, the heck with it, just going solely through our own website.
And I think the frustrating thing is, especially being around making software for so long, is Apple used to do this for free. They had their apple.com/downloads page where they would post their software for free. Because, back then, especially, there wasn't many people building Mac software. And Apple really did a good job in helping people. And now they kind of introduced this because they were doing it on iOS and taking the 30% cut. And it's tough. Why take money away from developers when you're the most profitable company in the world? And
that's probably bigger than a lot of countries.
Yeah, but it is. So one of the biggest countries. Yeah, so it's I wish that they would provide maybe more for the 30%, or cut that down a little bit more.
Right, that's a good point. They don't really. They provide, I suppose, the hosting and the page in their store, and the payment processing. So
that's negligible for anyone to kind of set up.
Right. Yeah, and payment processing these days is easy enough with, a whole host of ways you can deal with that. So.
Right, FastSpring.
Yeah, I've used FastSpring, which is wicked easy to get working with Xojo.
FastSpring's very, very good. They're a very good company. We use them for a really long time, and they're definitely a good payment processor.
Yeah, I originally, way back in the day, had used Decelerate, but pretty much have dropped them at this point.
Yeah, I don't think that they're doing. They kind of fell behind, I think. So we switched to FastSpring for all the products under the Rage software brand. With EverWeb, we have our own merchant accounts, but
Yep.
yeah, FastSpring we've been very happy with and very, very easy to set up.
Well, speaking of things that are like large countries, talking with you at XTC a couple weeks ago, it seems like you're probably one of the most prolific travelers that I know, and you've been all over the globe, or at least it seems like it, or at least compared to me, who barely ever leaves New England except to go to Xojo conferences. So, what would you say would be some of the cool places you've popped around with, and how do you actually work while you're bouncing all over the globe?
Well, I think we live in the best time to be alive because you just need, I mean, I don't even need one constantly, but an internet connection. And for me, I can work from anywhere. And I spent the last 6 months just traveling and working around Southeast Asia. And the funny thing about that is what's great about working from there is I'm working while everybody's sleeping. So I'm not getting emails. I'm not getting people bothering me. I'm just there. I can answer. They always say, check your email once in the morning and maybe before you go to bed, and that's it. Don't be checking it all day. And so when I'm there, I only have to check it when I wake up because that's all my emails have come in over the last couple hours while I was sleeping. So it's kind of like this productivity that just happens because the time zone difference. So that's pretty cool. But I spent a lot of time. I recently spent a lot of time in Vietnam, which I absolutely love. There's this one city there called Hoi An, where at night it's all filled with lanterns. So it's this really, really nice city that you can walk around. It's just lit up with all these lanterns. They light these candles and put them in the river. It looks really cool. During the day, there's tons of coffee shops with really fast free internet.
Nice. And
Vietnam's known for its coffee, so they give you this black coffee with condensed milk, and it's great. Keeps you it's really strong, so you're going all day. It's got a beach about a couple kilometers away. It's got this really old school looking gym run by a Vietnamese bodybuilder. So I would go there and just go to the gym, work, travel around a bit, do something interesting, go to the beach. It was really, really cool. I went back there twice because it was one of my favorite cities. And the interesting thing about that part of the world is they have internet. In most countries, they have internet everywhere. Thailand, Malaysia, which had slow internet, but I climbed the tallest mountain in Southeast Asia. And at the 6-kilometer mark, it's 8 kilometers up. So it's about, I think, 2,000 or 3,000 meters at that point. You have internet on that mountain at this like little hotel or whatever they have, this lodge that they have up there. So, I was emailing or texting my friends, and I could have done work. I didn't bring my laptop up there, but it was very easy to stay connected. And you just you put yourself in a different world, in a different place, and it opens your mind a bit. So one thing for me, it kind of opened my mind to doing a lot of localization and targeting other parts of the world, because there is a world beyond North America and even Western Europe. And sometimes you forget that. You forget that, it's funny because it came up a lot in XDC with the encoding issues, the text encoding issues. And most people don't think about this stuff, or some people don't think about it because you only deal with English, or you only deal with languages that don't need these extended characters. And it because everyone's speaking these different languages, you really have to think about that. And traveling has kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there's other people in this world and they need software and they need good things. And there's plenty of opportunity there. And that was really cool.
Do you speak any of those languages when you're in these areas, or are you able to get by with English?
About 4 or 5 words in each language, I think. Google Translate is great, although I don't think it really works that well with the Southeast Asian languages, because if I were to use it, they would look at me and still not understand what I'm talking about.
I've had people tell me that Google Translate is great for any language going into English, but going from English to other languages is borderline gibberish.
Well, that's what makes it so interesting, because you go to these different countries and their way of communicating is so different. Like Asian languages, they use tones to have a different word. So you can have the same word that to me sounds the same. So in Thai, for example, they have 5 different tones. So one word that sounds the same to me is completely different to other people, to Thai people, because they could hear these tones, which are very subtle to me because I'm not used to it. But if you go to Thailand and you live there or you speak Thai, obviously you could understand their different tones. So the word ha with one particular tone means 5. So instead of saying, if you told them a joke over a text or whatever, they would say, I would write ha ha ha. They would write 555, because in Thai, ha 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 means 555. So just kind of a funny thing. And those are the kind of things that I learned there, which are kind of funny and kind of cool. The differences, about their language there and how much different it is than our language. I think Cantonese has something like 11 different tones. And I thought that when they were telling me a word, I was repeating it the exact same, but they would just, laugh at me a bit and
laughing, you're offending their family or something. And
yeah, I think something completely wrong, So it's really cool to kind of get that different perspective.
Yeah, certainly, and just in general, cultural differences can mess people up too. I mean, even on our forums by and large English, people will use a turn of phrase or something that means something, say here in the United States, but someone in Europe that knows English perfectly fine has no idea what the person just said, because it's
Yeah, when I left Canada, I thought I spoke English, and then I met English people, and a lot of English people, and I didn't understand half the words they were talking about.
Yeah, that is a thing to get used to, and that is what makes also the XTC conference so neat, is because we have quite a few people from all over the globe that come. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I mean there had to be at least 20 different countries that were represented at XTC, which is a pretty high percentage for this isn't like an Apple conference that has thousands of people, and
yeah, I think it's pretty cool that people come there, and they come to the States for only 4 or 5 days. They go on an airplane for a long time, and it's expensive, and they get there, and it really goes to show how good the community is around Xojo. And it is really cool to see people from different parts of the world.
Definitely. Well, I'm trying to remember the first time we met at a Xojo conference, but
I think it was a couple of years ago. It was at I have a weird memory. I can remember things pretty good. When I meet a Paul, I remember all the Pauls that I meet.
There you go.
I think it was at one of the events, after the dinner events. We were standing in line for the buffet.
All right, it's plausible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for me, I meet so many people, usually everyone, that I have sometimes difficulty remembering exactly when I met someone for the first time. And then you start seeing them over and over, and they just become familiar. And you're like, hey, how's it going? Good to see you again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, is there anything else you wanted to bring up or talk about here on the XojoTalk podcast?
Anything else?
Let everyone know a fun little story that you've got. I mean, I've heard a few of your stories, listening over the years, but I'm sure you've got interesting story that you can share. That's what these sort of things are for people to share interesting things about themselves. So tell us something that you think would make an interesting story.
Well, I could share kind of a fun travel story that I recently had. I went to a lake house in a national park in Vietnam called Phang Nga National Park. And I had met these two English guys there. And this park is known for having the world's largest caves. They have this really cool one where it's called the Dark Cave, where you could, you go in and there's like mud baths in there. So you can kind of float over this mud, and you just throw mud at each other, which is kind of cool. But they just recently discovered the world's largest cave. And that, you got to sign up a year before to go into it. But they had this one, which is the world's 3rd largest cave. So the two English guys were trekking there. So I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. I had to go see it, and you get to camp out in it. So I did it, and I signed up. There was just one more spot left, and just coincidentally. And after I sign up, I find out that, it's not this easy trek. It's pretty much, if you ever watch Forrest Gump, when he goes to Vietnam and he talks about the rain coming from every place and he's deep into water. It was kind of like that. I learned about the leeches while I was going there, and you just kind of walk through 40 different streams, a 10-kilometer trek through the jungle. And you can't complain because as you're going through, you have these porters there who are carrying all your stuff in flip-flops and shorts, doing it like it's no problem. But anyways, we get to the cave, and it was only recently opened up to the public a couple of years ago, and so there haven't been that many people in there. And you get there, you get to camp out in it, and that was a really, really cool experience. One of my favorite experiences while I was traveling, and yeah, that and bungee jumping off the tallest building in the world, or the tallest bungee jump in the world, not the tallest building in the world.
Yeah, that's the one in India, right?
Yeah, it used to be. It actually used to be in Toronto. The CN Tower used to be the tallest build or structure, and I think we lost that maybe to Dubai or India or wherever. We're kind of falling behind.
Right, and you're saying we because technically that's your home base is Toronto, Canada.
Toronto, yeah, that's where I'm from. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's the extent of my grand travels is I've been to Canada once. So there you go.
Really? You got to come up here more often.
Yeah, I need to. Well, now that I need a silly passport to get into Canada now, so I got to go get a passport so I can actually easily, because it's not that far. I can get to Montreal here in about 5 hours, maybe.
Yeah, that's how long it takes me to get to Montreal.
Well, there you go.
You know what's funny is I just saw this I was just walking out of the grocery store, and this National Enquirer was sitting there, and they had this article. They had, on the front, they have their crazy sensational stories, and the front was, I took a picture of it because I thought it was hilarious, and it said something like suicidal pilots, why every American should be afraid to fly. And I thought that was just crazy. Yeah, here I have it. Suicidal pilots, why every American should be afraid to fly. I mean, that's just crazy. One guy does something in Europe, and now they have this sensational article there kind of making people fearful of traveling. And I thought, for me, I was, afraid to go to some of these countries too, because you hear all these bad things. But when you get there, you feel very, very safe. I felt more safe in Thailand than I did in many places in the States. And the first time I went to San Francisco, I had no idea what it was like there. I stayed at 7th and Mission or 8th and Mission, which apparently is not a place that you should really go to. I hear it's kind of cleaned up now, but there were some sketchy things going on there, and I felt very unsafe. I never really felt unsafe in a lot of these other countries where people have this preconditioned thinking, it's going to be very safe. And I'm happy that I just got out of my comfort zone and went, because it kind of opens up your eyes a little bit more to the world.
Yeah, and that's just general good life advice right there, is sometimes just step out of your comfort zone and try something that might make you a little bit uncomfortable just so you get a new experience. It probably won't kill you.
Hopefully doesn't.
Try to tell my kids that all the time. But
You gotta lead by example.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Let's
certainly.
get on Google Flights. We'll book you a flight somewhere.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. It's not necessarily that I'm afraid to go anywhere. It's just, I don't know. It's just that I haven't. But go figure. It'll always be the dream. But I do need to get up to. I do need to get to Montreal, so have to figure out how to get that.
You'll work on your French there.
Oui. Je m'appelle Paul. There we go. Those are the sentences I can say.
That's pretty much how far my French goes also.
Yeah, I know. A funny little story is when I first started doing the webinars, Stefan would retweet that I was doing a webinar and on the French Twitter account. And he would translate whatever the webinar title and description was to French when he retweeted it, because, his followers are all French. Well, I start the webinar. I don't remember which webinar it was, but I start the webinar and I start talking, and then people can type comment or ask questions to me in the webinar, and they pop up on the screen. I can see them. And this one person started typing questions in English, thankfully, but was very, very upset that the webinar was not in French. because my name, would probably tell people that maybe I am French. It's a pretty common name in France. Stefan had tweeted everything in French with my name that looks French. So the guy just thought the webinar was going to be in French, and I'm talking English. He was very, very upset. So the only phrase that I really know besides Je m'appelle Paul, which is my name is Paul, I think, is Je ne parle français. And I may have messed that up again, but it essentially means I don't speak French. I don't speak French, but I said it in French. So it's, it's a little bit of a joke there. And and that person thought that was absolutely hilarious and then stayed for the rest of the webinar and was great. But that's the extent of the French phrases I've learned at this point, or relearned.
Yeah, I can see why someone might get frustrated in that. I think, it's easy to kind of forget that everybody doesn't speak English, and and a lot of things, even if they do speak English, they might not get a lot of the subtle sayings or whatever. I mean, it's like me speaking to somebody from England. I don't understand anything they're saying, so I can relate to somebody who speaks French not really understanding everything, that even if they do speak English as a second language, not understanding everything that an English speaker might say. And it's expensive to cater to every different country, or every different language. But I think sometimes it's an opportunity. I think it's a really, really good opportunity that many developers and people don't take advantage of. And it's something like we have EverWeb translated into EverWeb and into French and Dutch, and we're looking to get some more done. And I think that that's a really good opportunity for people who might think the American store is too crowded and want to reach out, because there's billions of people who speak different languages, who do different things, and who have needs. And I think that's a really good opportunity for anyone to take advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. And I agree with your assessment of sometimes not understanding what English people actually are saying. Whenever I watch some TV show on BBC or something that's got people that have strong English accents, I have to put the subtitles on so I can make sure I understand what they're saying.
But they sound smart, because the English accent, it just sounds like whatever they're saying is really smart, and I would listen to everything they're saying. But yeah, sometimes I have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, I get that feedback on my webinars from time to time, is that people that don't speak English as a first language will tell me that I'm speaking too quickly, and I need to speak more slowly for people that don't speak English. And that's a bit of a challenge, because, I don't want to drone on and bore people that can speak English. And the webinars are recorded, so theoretically they could pause them. So it's a balance I'm always trying to figure out how to do. But sometimes you just get so excited and that you talk quickly, and then you're like, oh, crap, I'm talking quickly. Oh, well, hopefully they can pause. But yeah, it's always something to keep in mind. So I think I saw charts recently on the internet, and certainly English is not the primary language spoken on this planet. So always got to keep that in mind.
It's the most useful, probably, but
yeah. Well, in the case of programming, most programming languages typically have their commands are English.
Right.
I can't say that I've seen any that have commands that are in other languages, but other aspects of things. We do have partners that translate parts of our docs into other languages, Spanish and French and Portuguese and more that I don't know about, but I think it helps people get started. All right, cool. Well, I want to thank you, Paul. This is Paul Levine, maker of the really cool EverWeb website making software that is made completely in Xojo. And I guess that's it for this XojoTalk. So thanks again, Paul. Great to have you.
Thank you very much.